Thank you so much for letting me interview you today, Dr. Solomon-Lane, researcher, professor at Scripps College,
We are a
or
consortium of liberal arts schools, so it's Scripps College, Pitzer College, and Claremont McKenna College.
and you teach at all three, or how does
We
that
are, yeah, we're a
work?
shared science department. So the consortium is 5 colleges total. And then
Mhm.
historically, our department has been the science department for 3 of the colleges. And then moving forward, one of those schools is actually making their own department. So we have even more scientists joining our campus. And so moving forward, we are the science department for Scripps and Pitzer College. So it's a little bit confusing, but all of the schools are right here together on the same campuses, and students can take classes across campuses.
Awesome. And do you do any work at Harvey Mudd, or is that kind of a separate, is that the school that has the separate science department?
So Harvey Mudd, Claremont McKenna, and Pomona will have their own separate ones, but I see professors from there as well.
Nice. Um, and if you could just give kind of a little introduction about yourself, like who you are, how you ended up working in this academic space, and kind of what drew you to the institution that you're at.
Yeah. Um, Also, thank you for having me. It's so nice to be talking to you here.
Yeah.
So I've been here for maybe 5.5, 6 years. I knew that I wanted to be working primarily with undergraduates. I think that there's so much science that undergraduates can do if they have access to it. And I really wanted to be at that kind of institution. I went to a small liberal arts school, so that's also an experience that I had as a student. Of course, as a graduate student and as a postdoc, I was at bigger universities. So I went to Georgia State University for grad school and the University of Texas at Austin as a postdoc. But I was really excited to get back to an institution where teaching and research were both priorities, and that I could work closely with students. So that's sort of how I got to this kind of institution.
Yeah, and I know some people say that like being at a larger institution can mean there's a little more distance between like students and their professors, or like even on the side of being a professor, there can be kind of a hard time striking a balance between your academic research time and your teaching responsibilities. How did you feel being, both a student in that environment of being at a larger research school and, now being a professor at a smaller school? Like, how does that feel?
It's a good question. So I also think there are professors at big schools who are really gifted and dedicated teachers and are highly involved with their students. But there is a different percentage of your time that you dedicate to research versus teaching when you're at these different kinds of institutions. And that really does show up in the pace of research. So most of our experiments and most of our experimental work happens over the summer. And in my lab, we always have a pretty full lab. We had 6 or 7 students this past summer all working together for an 8-week summer internship. And during the academic year, we do research, but everyone has to fit it in between classes. And I think
Mm-hmm.
when professors are teaching less, like at a bigger school, you just have more time and bigger chunks of time to have that research happen during the academic year. And so you get a different pace of science.
Yeah. And do you feel like that's something that you kind of have control over, or is it really up to kind of the size of the institution you're at, or how that institution feels about what your time should be spent doing?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So the institution that you're at will certainly dictate like the literal number of hours that you are in a classroom versus not in a classroom. But I see so much variation among my colleagues at small schools, at my schools, but also across the country at really different kinds of schools. So I think that professors absolutely have agency in how they manage the rest of that time and what their priorities are. There's huge variation in whether people have more graduate students or fewer graduate students, whether they have a ton of undergraduates, even at these big schools, right? So, how many postdocs there are in a lab. So, I think there is absolutely opportunity for people to shape what their lab looks like and how their science is going to be carried out once they're at that level. Um, but if you're teaching 3 classes a semester or 2 classes a semester, that does speak for a lot of your time during the day.
Hmm.
And that's wonderful, right? I'm not even saying that's a bad thing. I love the time that I'm spending with students, but it is a big shift for we're not doing experiments that require big chunks of time during the academic year because I'm doing other things and I really love doing those things.
Of course. And so, can you walk me through what a day or like week in your life as a researcher looks like? Maybe during the school year when you have kind of a more um, or a less research intensive schedule versus maybe like during the summer when you have more time to get into your research.
Absolutely. So we are midway through the fall semester. So this is a great example of sort of where we are. I currently am working with 6 senior thesis students. And so I have regular meetings with them. So if we take yesterday as an example, it was a Thursday. I had meetings in the afternoon with my 3 thesis students who are currently writing up their summer research. And so those are individual meetings, and we get to talk about their work. We can talk about the literature. We can use the whiteboard to map out ideas, look at analyses, look at data, talk about making visualizations even stronger so that we can communicate information even more clearly. And so that's sort of what my whole afternoon was. In the morning, I teach and have office hours. So I'm teaching systems neuroscience right now for neuroscience majors, and I'm teaching hormones and behavior for non-STEM students, and that's actually a lab course. So I have students from economics, international relations, psychology, like sort of all across the disciplines. And so I have office hours after that where students can drop in and come and see me and talk about classwork. And then to end the day, I had faculty meeting. And so in that day, I got to talk with a lot of different students for a lot of different purposes. And on that particular day, sort of the time isn't mine to do other work. Like I'm not writing a lot on those days. Um,
Mhm.
During the summer, we come in, the hours are approximately 9 to 5. We have a group of about 6 or 7. And right now we have a lab tech in the lab as well. So she helps organize things in a really essential way. And we tend to have multiple projects in the lab that are happening simultaneously. And I really like promoting a collaborative work environment. And we really practice skills that are related to making collaboration happen. I think I don't know, some of those soft skills are not trivial, right? The science that we do is so
Mhm.
detailed and there's so many logistical pieces. You actually need to practice how are you going to carry out something like an experiment, right? And
Yeah.
so we try to time it so that I don't know, an intensive or more important part of one project will sort of occupy a day so that if someone else needs help, needs another set of hands, there are people who can step in and help. Um, and when students aren't, we study social behavior in fish and how the brain regulates behavior. And so if the students aren't in with the fish, they might be reading, they might be doing data analysis, they might be writing and working on their thesis. They might be meeting with me to sort of brainstorm new ideas. But kind of that whole day is dedicated to research and time with the students and time for me to write up other projects. Um, for other professors, they also might have kids who are getting out of camp, and so the students are working independently on certain days, and then they're in the lab in other days. So there's just a lot more flexibility and control during that time. But you're really only interfacing with your research students during the summer, and during the academic year, I have a much broader student base who I get to see on a regular basis.
Nice. And I just love how you kind of build in that like team working skill building into your research approach. I feel like that's so important, especially in a lab that might have multiple people in it who are interacting all the time. Like having that ability to work as a team and really learn how to prioritize research like tasks efficiently is so important. And something I've definitely learned as I've been transitioning into full-time research. Um,
Yeah. I also think it's allowing people to learn how they work best, right?
mm,
So, one example is if we're running, we measure a lot of hormones and we use ELISAs to do that. And we alternate which students are leading that, and they get to set the tone. So sometimes there's music playing if they sort of concentrate better with music going. And then sometimes there are days where the person who's sort of leading that day needs quiet. And so, like, you might come into the lab the day that that person is leading the group, and like you could hear a pin drop, right? And so I'm also just really impressed with the self-awareness that the researchers have and are learning about themselves for what they need to do to be successful, and also the respect of the other students to go along with it, right? So like
mhm.
I've had students work better when there's sort of music and chit chat, and so people sort of do that. And again, the example of doing better in silence, and people are totally game to do that as well. So there's just also a lot of respect shown back and forth.
Love it. Um, and what does the process of joining your lab look like for undergrads?
So we have so much student interest in research here. It is just extraordinary. And I love getting contacted by students who are interested in research. And there's such a variety of ways that people are thinking about this. So some people know what research is and they're really interested in the work my lab does. And so they really, really want to get involved. And then there's some students who just say, I've heard about this thing called research. Can you tell me about what that means, to be in your lab? And I love getting that whole spectrum, right? And so often I will meet with students. We do a research open house in the department every semester. And so it's an opportunity for professors to share what research they're doing. And then we go out into the courtyard and students can sort of walk around and the professors stay put at their table and we get to
Mhm.
talk. Sometimes I'll talk with students individually as well, especially if I have them in class or they're in advisee. And then I've moved more and more to working through an application process to try to be even more transparent and equitable about what we're looking for in the lab. In my lab, you don't need any previous experience. I love that we're a lab where we can just sort of take folks who are trying to get their first experience. But I am really looking for students who are interested in what we do. And then I ask them about whether they want to be a part of a welcoming, positive environment, and whether they want to join a collaborative group. And so I think we've also just been so successful in having people who are game to practice the skills of collaboration because they've sort of signed up for it from the beginning.
Mhm.
Um, and then I hire also based on timing. Like I said, I'm busy, so there was a student that I really wanted to hire, and I didn't hire them in the fall because they were only free at times I was teaching, and so I couldn't be a good mentor to them. And they joined the lab a later semester. So I really try to make opportunities for people who are interested in what we do and could contribute. And that's an amazingly fun and joyful and exciting process. And also, I wish I could work with all of the students who apply to my lab. Like, I truly believe that everyone would have something to contribute. And I just wish I wasn't sort of limited by time and energy.
Mhm. Mhm. Um, and kind of on that vein, could you talk a little more about the research that your lab does? Like, I know your focus is on the development of behavior, and you look at hormones to kind of put together that puzzle of how behavior is developed and kind of regulated in early life. And you're looking at a fish model, but what does that look like in terms of the kind of assays you do, the questions you're trying to answer, and kind of the broader scope of things.
Absolutely. So you had sort of mentioned this before, and I didn't answer it then, but I've always been interested in individual variation, sort of what makes us who we are. And I think part of the reason that I have thought about that for a long time is both of my moms taught preschool when I was little. And
Mm.
for people who are seeing this or listening to this who have parents who are teachers, like often you will go to their schools, right? If you are not at your own school. And so I started working with kids when I was really young. I was 10 and they were 5, right? And then I was a camp counselor for a really long time. And then I started teaching. And so I think I've always had this, insider view, right, into just how rich and amazing sort of variation can be. And I got really interested in social skills in particular, just because they seem to vary a lot. People have really different social approaches to their worlds. And I was just so fascinated about where that came from. And if you look across such a diversity of species, early life just always matters, right? We have literature for probably more than a century now saying how important early life is for adult phenotype. And so I got really interested in understanding early life experience, and then we use a highly social cichlid fish model. So it's a fish called Burton's mouth brooder. And they breed in the laboratory. And so we have access to these animals at all of their developmental stages. And this is a species where the babies actually develop inside of the mom's mouth, like inside of the buccal
Oh,
cavity. And so actually
interesting.
their first social experience is like developing alongside their siblings, like crammed into their mom's mouth. So you can imagine all of the like chemical signaling that's happening in there, right? And all of the tactile
Mm.
signaling that's happening there. And so as I'm thinking, like, okay, if the answer is always for understanding variation, like look earlier and earlier in life, it's like, okay, well, maybe we can start looking at these baby fish when they first come out of mom's mouth. They don't have any social experience out in the world. And so some of the experiments we do are with those fish, and we try to give them very specific social experiences. We measure behavior in the home groups, the home social groups that they grow up in, to try to get a sense of what role they're serving in that social group. We do individual behavior tests. So we will also take fish out of their groups and test them individually. And we do a lot of tests that people might be familiar with from like the rodent literature. Like we do open field tests, right? We just do it in an aquarium instead of in an empty tank. We look at tests related to social motivation, related to dominance behavior, related to subordinate behavior. And we really try to look as holistically as we can to try to get at different elements of behavioral phenotype. Because, of course, if you only look at behavior in one context, you're never going to see a comprehensive view of what that animal can do and would do given the circumstances, right? And I love
Mm.
talking to students about that, because if you ask them, do your professors know you as full people? And like, of course, the answer is no, because in a classroom, we have very clear social roles, right? The students walk into a classroom, they know where to sit. The teacher is going to go to the front, right? We sort of, based on social norms, based on experience in academic settings, we know what to do, right? And so even the students who I get to know outside of class, I'm never going to know them the way their family does, right? Or the way their best friend does, right? And so with the fish, I really like trying to ask the fish about its behavior in different contexts. Um, we can measure hormones non-invasively. Fish can actually excrete certain hormones through their gills, so steroid hormones like testosterone or estrogen or cortisol. So we can measure that from a water sample. And then we can do a lot with the brain that other systems can as well. So we can look at gene expression in the brain. We can do transcriptomics. We're just trying to get RNA-scope off the ground. So that's like a sort of new project that we're working on. So, and then we try to put it all together to understand what's happening with these animals. And then we also do things that the students come up with. So one of my favorite examples is I had a student in my lab who was a dual major in neuroscience and history. And she and I just got into these really deep conversations about what does it mean to have a territory if you're an animal? What does it mean to have a territory if you're a state, right? How do you draw country borders? And so we designed this experiment together looking at space use in these fish to see whether the makeup of their physical environment changed the social dynamics, and it totally did. So I also, we do things that I help drive in the lab, but the students also come with ideas as well.
Cool. And do you think there is any kind of through line in the types of questions that your students are bringing to the table, or are there certain topics that people in your lab who approach you for research are more interested in?
I think there are definitely themes. So there are people who come in and are interested in neuroplasticity and neurodiversity, right? Just thinking about how does variation happen at the level of the nervous system. Um, I'm trying to think about current themes. There are other themes around what is the effect of this, like a particular social environment or a particular social challenge. When I do labs in class, often it's about designing the physical environment in different ways and seeing sort of space preference and whether certain individuals within a social group are more likely to spend time near one another and preferentially interact with one another. Um, I have to say, the students are incredibly creative. And the time from when a student might express concern that they don't know what they want to do to the point of having like 13 ideas that we then need to choose from, I mean, it could be a matter of like 30 minutes. And so I am just always blown away with the creativity, but also their ability to build consensus, right? Because we work on projects, again, collaboratively. And so really
Mm,
listening to each other and deciding which is the best idea to put forward. But I wish I had more time. Their ideas are amazing.
yeah. Sounds like there's a lot of great ideas being generated, and you're very interested in kind of fostering an environment where people can be creative and do that work to kind of work collaboratively to bring these ideas to fruition. So, I mean, that just sounds amazing. Um,
And I like that working with social behavior because humans are a social species. Everyone comes in knowing something, right?
mhm,
And so I think that opens the door for people to bring their creativity forward in a way because everyone knows something about something social because we've lived it ourselves, right?
right. Um, so, in terms of your own research and kind of your career, what kind of media or people or mentors have been the most influential in your creative process?
So I sort of just talked about sort of the energy that I get from students, and I think that's really true. But I really have had, I feel very lucky for the mentors that I've had, both official and unofficial, starting in undergrad, right? From undergrad through grad school and postdoc, and having people who I thought were both really creative and innovative scientists in fields that I'm interested in, but also people who show how science can be done in these ways that are high integrity and really are ethical and treat people well. Like one of my biggest challenges was thinking about what kind of lab do I want to have when I am in charge of it? Because you're stepping
Mhm.
into a role with power in a way that you never had as a graduate student, or you never had, or I'll speak for myself, I never had as a graduate student, or I didn't have as a postdoc, right? Because of
Sure.
the structures of power. And so I think for me,
Mm,
one of the biggest things I was looking for is who is in my world that is demonstrating to me how to wield power responsibly and in a way that lifts other people up. And I feel really lucky that I think I've had multiple people in my orbit who have done that, who are, were professors when I was coming up. But I also really value the cohort that sort of got a postdoc and got a faculty position around the same time that I did, and how much I have learned from their experiences as well. So through the Animal Behavior Society, I was a part of a program called Weaving the Future of Animal Behavior, and they set up these peer mentoring groups. And mine has been meeting for 5 years now. We meet every other week, and it's other folks. Some are a little more advanced, some are a little like trajectory wise behind where I am. But we get to talk about challenges, right? Talk about successes and really think about what it means for us to be successful rather than measuring your own success against someone else. And I think that was just revolutionary for me, right? How do I want to solve a problem? Not how did someone else solve it? And so I mostly feel really, really lucky that I've had people around me who I think are role models. And I think the biggest bar that I wanted to clear was being a responsible wielder of power.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like it's so important to be kind of cognizant of all the responsibility that comes with research, and especially as a, person who's in a faculty position working with students all the time, kind of being really aware of the way that the relationship that you have with them shapes the work that they do and how they feel about the field. Like
Yeah.
I think it's awesome to hear you think so deeply and be so passionate about all these things. Um,
It
and
feels so important to me. Yeah. And I also try to model for the students in very relaxed ways, the ways that they can make decisions that empower themselves. So even the students that are extraordinarily enthusiastic about research, and we've already been talking about our plans for the following semester. At the start of each new semester, I ask everyone whether they want to continue with their research in the lab and how I would support them if they wanted to try something else. And um, it's a good model to sort of consider where we're putting our time and energy and then to enthusiastically buy in.
yeah, um, I guess kind of in that vein, and I know we're a little past half an hour, but just kind of as a closing thought, what is some advice or some kind of, words that you would have for aspiring neuroscientists or people who are aspiring to start doing research or kind of take the work that they're doing now to the next level?
I think my advice would be to pay attention and value your own perspectives. Speaking about students who are potentially earlier in their career than some of the folks who will be listening to this, so thinking about undergraduates, I think those students aren't always recognizing when their perspectives are actually interesting professional observations. They have so much knowledge and lived experience to bring to the things that they are interested in. But I think often students will feel like the thing that they have observed is something that everyone observes. The things that they are confused about is something that everyone is confused about. And highlighting what that thing is often a gap in the literature. If something is confusing after you've dug into it and really tried to interrogate it, the answer might just not be clear. The answer might not be there at all. And what feels like a personal opinion or expression might actually be the research hook into something really unique because other people are going to look at the same problem and not see the same perspectives or angles or elements that you do. And so to really respect and appreciate your own perspectives and opinions and allow some of those to enter into the professional realm and the scientific realm and appreciate them as observations that could lead to a scientific discovery. And if you follow those questions, I think following the question is really important. There are always multiple ways to answer a question with the different model systems and different methodologies. Um, but to really trust that inkling of questioning or interest or articulate what it is about a particular problem that stands out to you. Because my guess is that other people don't see it that way, but actually there's going to be progress in science if you followed it up. And I think to me, that's the most exciting thing is having a student. I once had a student who walked into the fish room, looked at these fish that I've been working with for years, and they asked me a question about them that I just had never thought of. And so to them, they were
Mhm.
like, this must be obvious. And it's like, probably isn't. And so that's what I love seeing in students. And I try to remember that for myself too, if I'm ever confused or frustrated or excited, right? To try to isolate that and figure out what it is, because that might be worth something following up on.
Well, that's a great closing thought, and I think so kind of relevant to anyone, not just in neuroscience research, but getting into research. It's so easy to think like, is the question I have even worth getting into? And do I want to put myself out there by asking it? But that's really what we're here to do when we do research.